When you think of dragons, you think of Smaug sitting on a pile of gold or Daenerys burning a city to the ground. But those are just the tip of the iceberg. Dragon myths appear independently on nearly every continent, and some of them are thousands of years older than anything Tolkien ever wrote. So today, we're breaking down every dragon myth you've never heard of, starting with one that's been around for over 3,000 years. Vritri. The Rig Veda is one of the oldest religious texts still actively worshipped on Earth today, dated roughly 1500 to 1200 BCE, and buried inside it, across at least 6 separate hymns, is a dragon called Vritra. Here's the thing. Vritra wasn't just some fire-breathing lizard guarding a treasure hoard. This dragon sealed every river and water source in existence inside a mountain. All of them. The entire world was dying of thirst because one creature decided nothing gets through. But here's where it gets interesting. The name of Vritra literally translates to obstruction or the covering. The dragon's entire identity isn't defined by what it looks like or what it does. It's defined by what it blocks. That's a genuinely strange way to build a monster. Most mythologies give you teeth and claws and fire. The Rig Veda gave you a locked door. So Indra, king of the gods, forged a weapon called the Vajra, a thunderbolt powerful enough to crack the mountain open and free the waters. Victory for the good guys, right? Not exactly, because some Vedic passages don't treat this as a simple rescue mission. They raise a question that never fully gets answered. Was Vritra hoarding those sacred waters, or was it protecting them? The texts leave it ambiguous, which means the thunder god's great heroic triumph might also be the moment he destroyed something sacred. That moral complexity alone makes Vritra one of the most fascinating dragons in human history. But the next myth takes that idea of a water dragon and flips it completely on its head. Apalala. So remember how Vritra hoarded all the world's water and Indra had to literally blast him apart with a cosmic thunderbolt? Apalala did the exact same thing. Different river, same problem. A massive serpent dragon living in the Indus River, blocking the flow of water to every kingdom downstream. Entire civilizations drying up because one dragon decided the river belonged to him. But here's where the story takes a hard left turn. Because the Buddha showed up, no weapon, no army, no divine thunderbolt. He just walked to the river and started talking. According to Buddhist texts from roughly the 1st to 3rd century CE, the Buddha sat down with a water-hoarding dragon and essentially held a therapy session. He taught Apalala the Dharma, explained the suffering he was causing, and convinced the dragon to let the water go. And Apalala agreed. Not because he was beaten, because he was persuaded. But it gets even stranger. The two of them didn't just shake hands and walk away. They negotiated a literal weather schedule. Apalala would release heavy monsoon rains during the wet season, then maintain controlled, steady flow during the dry months. This is a water management treaty between a spiritual teacher and a river dragon. That's what this myth is. The Buddha looked at the same problem every other mythology solved with violence and said, "What if I just asked nicely?" That contrast is the entire point. In Hindu tradition, you kill the dragon. In Buddhist tradition, you convert him. Same monster, same crisis, completely different philosophy baked into the resolution. Defeating a monster doesn't have to mean destroying it. Sometimes it means giving the monster a better job. But if converting a dragon sounds strange, wait until you hear about the one that ate 7 moons. Bakunawa. There used to be 7 moons in the sky. A dragon ate 6 of them. That's the core of the Bakunawa myth from the Philippines, and it's one of the most hauntingly beautiful origin stories in all of world mythology. The Bakunawa isn't some cave-dwelling lizard hoarding gold. She is described as coiling around the entire Earth 7 times, with each coil forming a mountain range. This is a dragon whose body is planetary in scale. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't some fringe local legend. The Bakunawa appears across at least 3 major Philippine language groups, Tagalog, Bisayan, and Ilocano, with the core details staying remarkably consistent across all of them. That kind of cultural survival across distinct languages means this myth mattered. It wasn't a bedtime story, it was cosmology. And it was functionally active during real astronomical events. In traditional Philippine belief, a lunar eclipse happens because Bakunawa is rising again, trying to swallow the last remaining moon. That shadow creeping across the lunar surface, that's her mouth closing around it. So communities would rush outside during eclipses, banging pots, shouting, making as much noise as possible to drive the dragon back before she could finish what she started thousands of years ago. The detail that stays with you, though, is the dragon herself. Bakunawa is specifically female, which is rare in a global mythological landscape dominated by male or genderless dragons, and some versions don't describe her as evil. She's solitary, melancholic, not monstrous in motivation, just hungry on a cosmic scale. She didn't destroy the sky out of malice. She was simply being what she was. The result is a world permanently diminished. The dragon didn't fully win, but humanity didn't fully win either. We saved one moon. 6 are gone forever. But if a moon-eating serpent wrapped around the planet sounds extreme, wait until you hear about the dragon that created an entire island chain from its own body. Ha-Tuibwari. Now here's where things get genuinely strange, and not in the cool monster way. In the what does this say about the human brain way? Thousands of miles from any Asian or European civilization, on the Solomon Islands in the middle of the Pacific, the Arosi and Kauka peoples developed their own dragon myth, completely independently. Zero documented contact with the traditions we've been talking about, and yet Ha-Tuibwari shares DNA with nearly every dragon we've covered so far. He's a winged serpent with multiple heads, 3 or 4, depending on the account, and he didn't just terrorize the islands. He created them. Ha-Tuibwari is a creator god who shaped the entire island chain into existence, which already puts him in rare territory. This isn't a monster to be slain. This is the reason the ground exists beneath your feet. But here's where it gets complicated. Ha-Tuibwari was simultaneously a nurturer and a destroyer. He could sustain entire communities or wipe them out, and the deciding factor wasn't strength or sacrifice. It was respect. Continuous ceremonial observance. Skip the rituals, and the creator becomes the catastrophe. No human sacrifice required, just don't forget who made you. The myth was literally mapped onto the landscape. Specific freshwater sources, volcanic formations, cave systems across the Solomon Islands were all tied directly to Ha-Tuibwari's presence. The dragon wasn't abstract. He was geography. Now, fair warning, everything we know about Ha-Tuibwari comes from oral tradition recorded by anthropologists between the 1960s and 1980s. There's no ancient written record. But that almost makes the convergence more fascinating, not less. Because if isolated Pacific Islanders independently arrived at winged serpent with multiple heads who created the world, then maybe the dragon archetype isn't something cultures borrow from each other. Maybe it's something human minds just build on their own. And if that thought doesn't unsettle you, the next dragon will. Because Gong Gong didn't just create the world, he broke it. Gong Gong. When you picture a Chinese dragon, you probably picture something wise, golden, and wrapped around a temple pillar during a New Year celebration. Gong Gong is the opposite of that in every possible way. This creature appears in the Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, compiled roughly 300 to 200 BCE, and the text describes something that shouldn't be able to exist. Gong Gong is a water deity with a human head, a serpentine body, and a physical composition of both fire and water simultaneously. Not fire or water. Both. At the same time. The myth announces its own weirdness before the story even starts. But here's where it gets genuinely massive. Gong Gong's defining act wasn't terrorizing a village or hoarding treasure. This dragon collided with Mount Boju, the cosmic pillar holding up the entire sky, and the pillar cracked. The collision tilted the heavens permanently to the northwest, and every body of water on Earth began flowing southeast. Forever. That's ancient China's explanation for why rivers flow toward the sea. Not erosion, not gravity, not tectonic shifts. A dragon threw a tantrum and broke the architecture of reality. The damage was so catastrophic that it triggered an entirely separate myth just to deal with the aftermath. The goddess Nua had to gather 5 colored stones and physically patch the holes in the sky, spending enormous effort repairing what one creature destroyed in a single moment. 2 of China's most important creation myths are linked in a direct causal chain, and Gong Gong's rampage is the hinge connecting them. That's what makes this dragon genuinely fascinating. It's not a monster in a cave, it's a cosmological explanation. Why isn't the sky perfectly centered above us? Why does water only flow in one direction? because something broke the world, and the world was never fully fixed. Gong Gong turned observable asymmetry in nature into the consequence of a single permanent disaster. But if a dragon that reshaped Earth's geography sounds extreme, wait until you hear about the one that became an entire country's identity. Dirook. Every other dragon on this list is a story. Druk is a passport stamp. Bhutan didn't just adopt a dragon as a mascot, the country literally named itself after one. The official name is Druk Yul, Land of the Thunder Dragon. The national flag has the Druk on it. The national airline is called Drukair. The sports teams are called the Druk. The formal title of the government itself is Druk Gyalkop. This isn't a cultural footnote. This is a nation-state that looked at every possible symbol of identity and picked the same dragon every single time. But here's where it gets interesting. Druk isn't some recent branding exercise. Buddhist texts from Bhutan reference the thunder dragon as far back as the 7th century CE, describing a wingless flying serpent that breathes fire and clouds simultaneously. And that specific combination matters, because it's iconographically distinct from both Chinese lung dragons and European wyverns. Bhutanese scholars are very explicit about this. Druk carries Buddhist symbolic weight tied directly to Bhutanese sovereignty, not borrowed from anyone else's mythology. The real story, though, is what happened in the 20th century. Because mythology usually does the opposite of this, cultures modernize, old symbols fade, ancient creatures get reduced to tourism logos, Druk went the other direction entirely. In 1974, when Bhutan formalized its national flag design, 4 Druk symbols were placed on it, each representing a major achievement of the monarchy. That made Bhutan the only modern nation on Earth whose entire constitutional identity is built around a single mythological creature. Think about that for a second. There's a country right now today where the dragon on the flag isn't decorative, it's definitional. The creature didn't survive modernity. It intensified through it, moving from regional religious symbol to the foundation of national identity. But if a living dragon myth sounds strange, wait until you hear about one of the oldest dead ones, a Hittite serpent carved into clay tablets over 3,000 years ago. Illuyanka. Here's the thing about dragon myths. We treat them like they've always existed, like every culture just naturally came up with fire-breathing serpents at roughly the same time. But someone had to be first. Someone had to carve the very first dragon story into something permanent, and there's a very good chance it was the Hittites. Illuyanka is documented on cuneiform clay tablets excavated from Boğazköy, the ruins of ancient Hattusa in modern Turkey. These tablets are dated to approximately 1600 to 1400 BCE. That's not a rough guess or a scholarly estimate with a 1,000-year margin of error. These are physical artifacts cataloged as KB 03.7 and KB 012.4, sitting in museums where you could walk up and look at them. Clay tablets that a human being pressed a reed stylus into nearly 3,500 years ago to record a story about a dragon fighting a god. But here's where it gets heavy. This myth predates Norse dragon mythology by over 2,000 years. It predates Beowulf by roughly 2,400 years. It predates the Book of Revelation's serpent imagery by more than a millennium. And almost nobody in Western popular culture has ever heard of it. The story itself is wild. In the first version, the storm god Tishub fights Illuyanka and loses. The god gets defeated. He has to recruit a mortal hero and use a net, basically resorting to a trap, because divine power alone wasn't enough. In the second version, Teshub's own son gets involved and the resolution is darker, morally messier, with no clean victory to celebrate. But the strangest part isn't either version. It's that the Hittites kept both. They didn't pick a winner. They didn't canonize one ending and burn the other. They preserved 2 contradictory conclusions side by side, which suggests a mythology that was comfortable with ambiguity rather than demanding a neat moral lesson. And this wasn't just a campfire story. The annual Puruli festival was a state ceremony performed by Hittite kings specifically to commemorate Teshub's victory over Illuyanka. Dragon mythology embedded directly into royal political ritual, functioning as a mechanism of cosmic renewal for centuries. Historians actively study whether Illuyanka represents a distinctly Anatolian tradition or a Proto-Indo-European archetype that eventually branched into the Greek myth of Typhon versus Zeus and the Norse myth of Thor versus Jormungandr. But if you think a dragon embedded in ancient state politics is unsettling, wait until you meet one that literally fused itself to a human king's body. Zahak. Every dragon myth we've covered so far has one thing in common. The monster comes from outside, it rises from the ocean, descends from the sky, crawls out of a cave. Zahak didn't come from anywhere. He was already sitting on the throne. The Shahnameh, Ferdowsi's massive Persian epic compiled around 1010 CE, tells his story, but the roots go much deeper. Zahak originates in Zoroastrian traditions stretching back possibly to 500 BCE, making him one of the oldest dragon figures in recorded mythology. But here's the thing. He didn't start as a dragon at all. He started as a man. A king, specifically. And then Ahriman showed up. Ahriman is the Zoroastrian embodiment of chaos and darkness, the anti-god, the corruptor. He approached Zahak and kissed both of his shoulders. From those 2 points, serpents grew directly out of the king's body. Living, hungry, permanent. They couldn't be cut off. They couldn't be burned away. They were part of him now. And they needed to eat. 2 human brains, every single day. Not gold, not cattle, not sacrificial offerings. Brains. The organ responsible for thought, creativity, resistance. Every morning, 2 people in Zahak's empire lost the ability to think because their king's body demanded it. This went on for 1,000 years, a millennium of daily harvest, of a population slowly being drained of its intellectual capacity by the very person sworn to protect them. That's not a dragon hoarding treasure, that's tyranny eating its subjects' minds. But here's where it gets darker. Zahak wasn't cackling on his throne enjoying this. The serpents weren't a weapon he wielded, they were a dependency he couldn't escape. Every decision he made as ruler was filtered through one question. How do I feed the things growing out of my shoulders? He became less human with every passing decade, more serpent than king. But he never stopped governing. The empire continued. The brains kept coming. The hero Faradin eventually defeated him. But Zahak wasn't killed. He was chained inside Mount Damavand, the tallest peak in Iran, still alive, still bound, still waiting. Some Zoroastrian traditions hold that he'll break free at the end of time. The mountain in Israel. You can visit it. And somewhere inside, according to a myth older than most civilizations, a king who became a monster is still hungry. But if Zahak is a dragon born from corruption, the next myth gives us one born from the earth itself, so massive its corpse became an entire archipelago. Stur Worm. After 1,000 years of brain-eating tyranny, let's talk about a kid with a boat and absolutely nothing else. The Stur Worm comes from Orkney, a cluster of islands off the northern tip of Scotland, and it might be the most geographically ambitious dragon myth ever told. The creature was so massive that when it finally died, its body became the islands themselves. Every single one. Each island is a different piece of the serpent's remains. Its teeth became the rocks and skerries dotting the coastline. Its venom seeped into the earth and became the soil. The people telling this story were literally standing on the dragon. But here's where it gets interesting. The hero who kills this world-sized monster isn't a god. He's not a prince. He doesn't wield a magic sword or carry divine blood. His name is Asapatl, and he's a poor boy with no special anything. His entire plan sounds like something a 10-year-old would come up with during recess. He steals a small boat, waits for the Stur Worm to yawn, sails directly into its open mouth, navigates down its throat, finds the stomach, and sets the liver on fire from the inside. And it works. The death of the Stur Worm plays out like a geological event. The dying serpent's convulsions created waves that rearranged the entire coastline. Its body settled into the sea and hardened into the landscape that Orcadian storytellers actually lived on for generations afterward. This isn't a myth where the dragon disappears after the battle. The dragon is the ground beneath your feet, but the real subversion here is the class dimension. Think about every major dragon slayer you know. Sigurd had magic blood. St. George had divine backing. Beowulf was literally a king. The formula demands nobility, destiny, enchanted weapons. Asapatl has a boat and a fire, and the willingness to crawl somewhere no sane person would ever go. That's it. No prophecy chose him, no god blessed him. He just decided to do it. The myth was primarily documented through 19th century folklore collections, so its true age is uncertain. But the story's DNA is unmistakable. Ordinary courage beats cosmic horror. And sometimes the monster doesn't vanish. Sometimes you build your entire world on top of it. Now, if you think a dragon that becomes the landscape is strange, wait until you meet one that becomes a dragon slowly, over decades, transforming from something almost harmless into something unstoppable. Bola and Kulshedra. In Albanian mythology, a dragon isn't born, it's made. The bola starts as a serpent, nothing remarkable, nothing monstrous. Just a snake coiled somewhere out of sight doing what snakes do. But here's what makes this myth unlike anything else we've covered today. If that serpent survives long enough without being seen by human eyes, it begins to change. The timeline depends on which regional version you're hearing. 9 years, 12 years, 27 years. The number shifts, but the principle never does. Time plus privacy equals catastrophe. And the transformation isn't subtle. The bola doesn't just get bigger, it grows heads. 7, 9, sometimes 12 of them in the fully evolved form. It sprouts wings, it develops fire breath. Every year that passes without detection, the creature gets worse. More powerful, more destructive, more irreversible. The bola is a ticking clock disguised as a snake. But here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. When the bola completes its transformation, it becomes a Kulshedra, and the Kulshedra is specifically female. She devours herds, flattens villages, and terrorizes entire regions. The only thing that can kill her is a young boy. Not a warrior, not a king, not a woman, a boy, specifically. Scholars have documented this requirement consistently across regional variants, though nobody fully agrees on why youth and gender matter so much to the myth's internal logic. That's strange enough on its own. But the real horror is what happens after you kill her. Kulshedra's eggs contain new bola serpents, small, ordinary-looking, completely undetectable. And each one of those serpents begins the cycle again. Hide long enough, avoid human eyes, and decades later, another Kulshedra rises. The myth is self-regenerating by design. You don't defeat the threat, you reset it. Now, the documentation here is honest about its limitations. Written sources before 1900 are sparse. The bulk of what we know comes from 20th century ethnographic scholarship and recorded oral traditions. Regional variations are significant, which actually tells you something important. This is a living mythology, one that communities shaped and reshaped across generations, rather than a fixed canonical text. And that's exactly why it earns the final spot in this video. Every other dragon we've talked about today simply exists. They're creatures, they're gods, they're monsters. The bola is different. In Albanian tradition, dragonhood is not a state of being. It's a destination, a process, something ordinary that was given enough time and enough darkness to become something catastrophic. The horror isn't that the creature was always this way. The horror is that it had time. And somewhere, unseen, the next one is already changing. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.